The moment an avoidant realizes you will never come back, they don't move on. They fracture internally, and they begin doing things in silence that would shock you, because what they show the world is calm. But what happens behind their eyes is psychological warfare, not against you, against themselves. And here is the strangest part. They don't miss you the way you think. They miss the version of themselves that existed when you still wanted them, when you were still reachable, when they could keep you close enough to feel powerful, but far enough to feel safe. Avoidants don't fear love itself the way most people assume. What they truly fear is what love demands from them internally. Love requires presence, emotional honesty, and the willingness to be affected by another person. For an avoidant, this feels like stepping into a room with no exit. The moment emotional closeness begins to deepen, their nervous system interprets it as danger, not comfort. They may enjoy attention, romance, and even physical intimacy, but when the bond starts becoming real, their internal alarm system activates. This is why they often pull back right when things are going well. The core issue is emotional exposure. Being loved means being seen, and being seen means the possibility of being judged, disappointed, or abandoned. Many avoidants grew up learning that vulnerability was unsafe, that expressing needs led to rejection, or that depending on someone meant losing control. So as adults, they associate emotional attachment with weakness. They may crave closeness, but feel ashamed of craving it. This creates a painful contradiction inside them. They desire connection, yet they fear what connection will reveal about their inner wounds. Dependency is another trigger. When someone becomes important, the avoidant feels trapped by the responsibility of maintaining emotional availability. They fear they will not be enough, or that they will eventually fail, so they sabotage early. Sometimes they create distance through silence, busyness, criticism, or emotional numbness. They convince themselves they are fine alone, but deep down, it is not strength, it is protection. Their detachment is not confidence, it is armor. When an avoidant realizes you will never come back, something shifts inside them that most people never get to witness. At first, they may appear calm, even relieved, because distance is their comfort zone. Their mind tells them they have regained control, that the emotional pressure is finally gone. But the human nervous system doesn't work on pride, it works on attachment. And once the avoidant senses that your absence is permanent, their body begins reacting in ways their ego cannot manage. This is when relief turns into panic. Not loud panic, not dramatic panic, but a quiet internal destabilization. Their routines start feeling empty, their distractions stop working. The silence that once felt safe begins to feel suffocating. They may suddenly feel restless, irritated, or anxious without understanding why. This is because their nervous system was secretly dependent on your presence, even if they never admitted it. You were a stable emotional reference point, someone they could return to when they felt lonely, stressed, or unsure of themselves. When you stop being available, their subconscious interprets it as abandonment, and abandonment triggers the very childhood wound that shaped their avoidance. They might not cry or beg, but internally they experience an identity shock. They start questioning their choices. They replay conversations. They obsess over small moments. Their mind tries to regain control by analyzing what went wrong, but analysis only makes the emotions stronger. This is why avoidance often returns suddenly after long silence. It's not always love awakening, it's their nervous system screaming that something essential has been lost. They begin feeling what they avoided for years, and it overwhelms them. When an avoidant realizes the distance is no longer temporary, they begin replaying memories in a way that is almost obsessive. This happens because their mind is trying to regain what they lost without actually having to face emotional vulnerability. As long as you were still reachable, their brain could stay relaxed. Even if they ignored you, even if they acted cold, there was still a hidden comfort in knowing you existed in the background. The possibility of your return made their detachment feel safe, but when you are truly gone, the safe distance becomes permanent, and that permanence creates a psychological shock. Avoidants often suppress emotions in real time. They don't fully process love, intimacy, or connection while it is happening because their defenses are active. They stay in control by staying emotionally numb. But once the relationship ends and there is no pressure to respond, no expectation to be emotionally present, their defenses weaken. That is when memories begin flooding in. Suddenly they remember your voice, the way you looked at them, the comfort of your presence, the moments you supported them, and the loyalty you offered even when they gave you little. What makes this more intense is that memory is safer than reality. In their mind, they can revisit you without risk. They can feel close without being trapped. They can experience intimacy without responsibility. This is why they start romanticizing the past. They may even convince themselves that you were perfect, not because they suddenly changed, but because their fear is no longer blocking their feelings. This replaying becomes a private form of grief. They relive moments they once dismissed, and it haunts them because now they can finally feel what they refused to feel when you were still there. When an avoidant begins to feel the reality of losing you, their first instinct is not to admit pain, but to protect their ego. This is why they unconsciously rewrite the story of what happened. If they accepted the truth directly, that they pushed away someone valuable, they would be forced to confront guilt, regret, and the terrifying possibility that they were the problem. For an avoidant, that kind of self-exposure feels unbearable. So instead of processing the loss honestly, they reshape it into a version that allows them to feel in control. They may tell themselves, "I didn't really want them," or "it wouldn't have worked anyway." They may convince themselves that you were too emotional, too needy, too intense, or too demanding. Not because these things are necessarily true, but because labeling you as the issue helps them avoid the deeper truth that intimacy frightened them. Their mind creates a narrative where leaving was a logical decision, not an emotional failure. This narrative becomes a shield. This is also why avoidants often act cold after a breakup. The coldness is not always cruelty, it is self-defense. If they allowed themselves to acknowledge how much you mattered, they would feel powerless. They would feel exposed. They would feel like a person who lost something irreplaceable. So they choose the safer illusion. "I'm fine. I moved on. I never needed them." But deep down, their nervous system knows the truth. Even if their words deny it, their subconscious remembers the emotional security you provided. So while they speak as if they chose freedom, their inner world begins to suffer in silence. They may replay memories, stalk your updates, or feel sudden jealousy, all while maintaining the mask that they are unaffected. This is the psychological split. Their ego claims victory while their heart quietly collapses. If you've ever experienced this push and pull with an avoidant, hit like and subscribe right now, because what I'm about to reveal next explains why they come back suddenly and why it feels almost supernatural when they do. Now, listen carefully. When avoidance goes silent, many people assume it means they have stopped caring. In reality, silence is often the most active thing they do. It is not always absence, it is control. Avoidants struggle with direct emotional confrontation, so when feelings become intense, they retreat into distance. But that distance does not mean detachment in the way it appears. Instead, it becomes a hidden space where they can still stay connected without exposing themselves. This is why their silence often becomes louder than words. They may stop texting, stop calling, and act like you no longer exist, but privately they begin watching. They check your social media, your status, your profile picture changes, and your online activity. They may not like your posts because that would reveal interest, but they still observe. It is a quiet form of emotional monitoring. They want to know if you are moving on, if you are hurting, if you are happier without them. This information helps them regulate their inner insecurity. Avoidants often fear rejection more than they admit, so instead of reaching out directly, they gather information indirectly. They might ask mutual friends about you casually, pretending it is random curiosity. They might bring up your name in conversation just to see how others react. They may even show up in places where they might accidentally run into you. These are not coincidences. They are controlled attempts to remain psychologically present in your world. This behavior comes from their need to keep emotional power. If they openly admit they miss you, they risk vulnerability. But if they quietly watch you, they can still feel connected while maintaining the illusion of independence. It becomes a hidden attachment style. They want closeness, but only from a safe distance where they cannot be rejected. So even when they appear absent, their attention often remains fixed on you in ways you may never notice. Avoidants often begin idealizing you only after you're gone because intimacy feels safer when it exists only in imagination. When you were present, real closeness demanded emotional responsibility. It required them to respond, to be consistent, to show vulnerability, and to allow themselves to be affected by your emotions. That kind of emotional exposure feels threatening to an avoidant, so while you were there, they focused on your flaws, your needs, or anything that justified emotional distance. This is not always conscious manipulation. It is a defense mechanism designed to keep them from feeling overwhelmed. But once you leave, the pressure disappears. There is no expectation to communicate, no need to explain themselves, no risk of being confronted with their emotional limitations. And because the threat is gone, their defenses relax. That is when the mind begins to romanticize. Suddenly, the very traits they criticized become the traits they miss. Your affection becomes rare. Your loyalty becomes sacred. Your patience becomes unforgettable. The avoidant begins remembering moments they once treated as ordinary because now those moments exist in a place where they cannot be lost again. Memory. In imagination, they can experience love without the fear of being trapped. They can replay your smile, your voice, your kindness, and they can feel close without having to show up emotionally. They can love you from a distance where they remain safe. This is why they often seem to wake up emotionally after the breakup. They start thinking about what they could have done differently. They may even feel deep regret, but it is regret mixed with fantasy. This idealization is also connected to control. When you are gone, you cannot demand anything from them. You cannot challenge their avoidance. So the relationship becomes perfect in their mind, not because it truly was, but because it is no longer real. The fantasy version of you becomes a comfort zone, and they start craving the connection they refused to fully experience when it was actually available. When an avoidant realizes you are truly gone, the part of them they keep hidden begins to surface. This is what can be called their shadow self, the emotional material they have spent years suppressing to survive. Avoidants are often experts at appearing calm, rational, and unaffected, but this is usually a mask built from emotional repression. They learned early that needing people leads to disappointment, so they trained themselves to detach before they could be hurt. But when you leave permanently, detachment no longer protects them, it exposes them. At first, they may still act indifferent. They may tell themselves they are fine. They may distract themselves with work, social life, or new attention. But underneath, regret begins growing. Not regret in the form of open sadness, but regret that shows up as irritation, restlessness, mood swings, or sudden emotional numbness. They may feel an uncomfortable emptiness they cannot explain because they are not used to sitting with loss. They avoided the pain for so long that when it arrives, it feels like an emotional invasion. Obsession can also develop quietly. They may replay memories repeatedly, imagining conversations they never had, thinking about what you are doing, who you might be with, and whether you still think of them. Jealousy emerges because your absence becomes proof that they no longer have access to you. This threatens their ego. They may not want to admit they care, but the idea of you belonging to someone else triggers a deep possessiveness. This is not always love. It is a fear of replacement and a fear of being forgotten. Their emotional collapse is often silent because avoidants struggle to express vulnerability. They may not cry in front of anyone, but they may experience insomnia, anxiety, or a sudden need for validation. They may begin stalking your social media, asking mutual friends, or testing the waters with small messages. This is the shadow self surfacing, the part of them that feels needy, insecure, and emotionally hungry, the very part they spent their life denying. When avoidance returns suddenly after a long period of silence, it often looks like a dramatic awakening. They may send an unexpected message, apologize, act emotional, or speak with a softness you never saw before. This can feel confusing because it seems like they finally realized your worth. Sometimes they did. But the deeper truth is that their return is often driven by fear as much as love. Avoidants are not always running away from you. They are running away from the emotional intensity inside themselves. And when you leave permanently, that intensity has nowhere to go. At first, avoidants cope with distance by telling themselves they are better off alone. They distract themselves, seek new attention, or bury themselves in work. But when the excitement of distraction fades, the emptiness becomes louder. They begin to feel what they avoided during the relationship: longing, regret, loneliness, and the painful awareness that they lost someone who truly cared. Their nervous system starts to panic because their attachment bond is still active, even if they try to shut it down. They may not consciously admit they miss you, but their body reacts as if something essential has been taken away. Another major reason they return is identity loss. Many avoidants unconsciously build their sense of value around being desired. When you were chasing them, it gave them a sense of power and security. It reassured them that they were wanted even if they did not fully show up. When you stop coming back, that validation disappears. They suddenly feel invisible. They feel replaceable. And this creates a deep internal crisis because it forces them to face their emptiness without the comfort of your attention. So they return not always to build something healthy, but to restore emotional access. They want to know the door is still open. They want to know they still matter. If you respond warmly, they calm down. If you stay distant, they feel abandoned, and their fear intensifies. Their return can be real, but it is often a reaction to emotional terror rather than true emotional maturity. In the end, the avoidant does not suffer because you left. They suffer because your absence forces them to face what they spent their entire life escaping. When you finally stop coming back, you don't just disappear from their life, you disappear from the illusion that they were untouchable, in control, and emotionally invincible. Your silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, they see the truth they avoided for years. They were not strong, they were protected. They were not independent, they were afraid. And that is why the moment you truly detach is the moment they begin to feel everything. They replay memories, they stalk in silence, they rewrite the story, they romanticize what they once dismissed, and they quietly collapse under emotions they never learned to hold. They may return, not because they suddenly became healed, but because losing you awakens the fear of being forgotten, replaced, and exposed. But your lesson is simple and powerful. You were never meant to chase someone into emotional maturity. You were never meant to beg for consistency. The avoidant's greatest regret is not losing you as a person. It is losing the version of themselves that almost felt safe in love. And once you are gone for good, they realize something too late. The love they ran from was the very thing that could have saved them.